Hey everybody, welcome to today's third Text Mixer session. This has been a fantastic event. We hope you're having a great time and that you're learning all about the different technologies that we here at Telarus and at Matrix offer. I want to introduce today's session by first welcoming our two co-hosts for today's session. And this is first Miss Megan Tai, who is an expert in UCaaS and all things Microsoft Teams. Megan, do you want to talk about your history and what you've done?
Hello, Shane. Hi, everyone. So my name is Megan Tai here at Telarus. I'm the Director of Contact Center and UCaaS Solutions. I'm going to date myself, but boy, I've been doing this for a long time. I want to say maybe 20 years, something like that. And I've spent a lot of time on the supplier side prior to coming to Telarus. So some of you guys might know me. I came from one of the UCaaS industry leaders called 8x8. Spent many years with them. So I think from an experience of selling a solution to a customer, I know where you guys have been. I've been in your shoes, and having to present a technology that's going to help a customer specifically for what they need. That's what I've always done. Now, of course, coming to this other side with Telarus, it's been a lot of fun because I can take a completely unbiased approach and look at all the different technologies that could apply to a customer. So I'm here to work with you as you're working with your customers to figure out, what are their needs, especially as it's pertaining to Microsoft Teams and integrations today, which we're hearing quite a lot about. So I'm here to help you with that piece, as well as continuing to further educate your folks as much as needed with the technologies around UCaaS and contact center. What's trending in the industry, or the new up and coming technologies that we're seeing, and what's relevant to you and your customers. So that's what I'm here for.
Nice, thanks, appreciate it. We're also joined by Josh Lopresto, who is the Vice President of Solution Engineering at Telarus. And again, Telarus is a partner of Matrix, and we work closely hand in glove with their team. Josh leads the engineering efforts. And Josh, do you want to talk a little about your background?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Shane. Happy to be here. Excited to be an extension of the team. And my goal here is to really take a technical look at all the different platforms. And so we get pulled into a myriad of different things. And that's UCaaS, that's cloud infrastructure, security, everything in between. And so, my background goes back about 10 plus years, came from a startup, wore a lot of hats, but with that meant a lot of cool experience. So a lot of, cloud infrastructure when AWS was first starting out in production and development, fast forward into telephony and Asterisk and servers and all these great things that mixed in with telco have given me kind of great experience and had some great leadership that helped me learn all these things along the way. And so, fast forward to kind of where we're at now. I've been in this role about 7 years, managing the engineering team. We've got a great team of engineers across the country that support a myriad of different technologies. And our goal really at the end of the day is we're here to help be an extension of that team and understand of all the different technology providers out there, who really does what and how that platform actually works when it comes time to put it into production based on customer requirements. So we try to take and cut through the weeds of what the marketing material says, get behind, behind the scenes and understand what's really there, mix that with whatever the customer requirements might be, and then, factor in all the crazy changing technology landscape and what everybody's doing, and figure out how to bring that in and kind of build a solution on that. So, excited to be here and help and be an extension of the Matrix team.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, perfect. And I'm Shane Speakman. I'm the Vice President of UCaaS at Telarus. And today we're going to talk about how to leverage Microsoft Teams as a phone system. And of course, everybody is talking about Microsoft Teams. This has been one of the hottest topics. We have ourselves been immersed with end users and different technology brokers around the world to really try and identify who are the best suppliers for this, what the technology really is accomplishing. Is this a viable source moving forward for a phone system? And with the continual changes that are happening, it's a really messy landscape. And so what we've tried to do is organize that, and we'll talk about how we're doing it today. But first of all, let's just talk in general. And I would say, Megan, if you could talk about the conversations that are happening around Microsoft Teams. You and I have a long history in this industry, everything from Asterisk servers to BroadSoft and beyond. And it's, as we kind of evolve through the phone system world, it's interesting to see non-traditional players like Microsoft purchase up companies like Metaswitch and talk about what you're seeing. Absolutely the expert. And as you see, kind of I don't know, the in-depth inside view into what an end user is looking for. Talk to us about, what those considerations are.
Sure, yeah. I would say the majority of our calls as we go through discovery with them to figure out, okay, what are their pain points? What are they looking to solve for? What is their current setup? 9 out of 10 times, they'll say, well, we've moved to Teams, right? Not a surprise because of the pandemic. Everyone was forced to move to Teams for their work from home environment. It was just the quickest way to do it so they can collaborate internally. So what we're seeing and what we're hearing is, well, so we love the Teams interface. It's been so easy to work with. Peer-to-peer calling has been good. Communications has been good. But now we need to communicate with the outside world. And how do we do that? Do we stay with Teams? Or Microsoft in general? Do we look at something else? And what are those options? So we hear that quite a bit. So we all know, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, we all know Microsoft, what they are really good at is that collaboration piece, but not so great at the call quality or the calling piece, right? They've been trying to dabble with it for years now, in and out. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this Metaswitch acquisition once everything, the dust settles. But for now, what we're hearing is we don't know if it's reliable enough. Is there redundancy built in? What do we do for failover? Are there SLAs? And all these concerns that customers have, they just know we love this interface with Teams. We want to live within that interface. Now, how do we take it a step further and live within the interface to get really good call quality and additional features that we need from a third party or UCaaS provider? So those are the things that I come across quite often when I'm talking to customers, what their needs are, what they're looking for.
Right. That's good. And of course, I think a lot of this is driven from the top down, right? As we've had to move to a work from home environment, a lot of executives are saying, look, we need to have a ubiquitous experience and be able to communicate freely with not only our customers, but internally. And so certainly it's been a very fortuitous entrance into this technology. Josh, do you mind talking about what the acquisition of Metaswitch means and how that's impacting our not only Matrix and how we interact with them and their end users, but just from a technological perspective, what that really means?
Yeah, I think we've all been watching this space, right? The channel as we know it, and waiting for the big boys to really creep in, right? We saw that first from the Cisco side. We saw that then again with Microsoft. And Microsoft buying Meta is very interesting because it's kind of trying to figure out, well, what's the real play here, right? Is the play here, we want to bolster the feature set of capabilities behind the scenes, ACD, IVR, skills-based routing, and really add that up? Is it for the customer base? What does it really mean over time? You factor in that Microsoft at the same day bought a little, kind of 5G software-defined networking company. So it ties me into a little more of the feature set and routing capabilities across the entire Azure and Microsoft environment as one of the key reasons. Obviously, there's a big base of customers that came with that they can kind of cross-sell all the other Microsoft services under the sun into. But I think what it really comes down to is it's Microsoft really solidifying that they're here to stay. And they've seen the success in the UCaaS world. They know that they've created a great collaboration tool. And it's just a matter of iteration. And we saw this when the first version of the e-licensing came out, right? We knew it wasn't perfect. We knew the E5 wasn't perfect. It had flaws, but it was them saying, we're here. We're going to get this right. We're going to iterate over time. We're going to figure it out. And that landscape is going to evolve. And so, I think, again, to Megan's point, when the dust settles, we'll see how it really shakes out. But, generally talking to everybody that, is Meta related, has Meta at the core, is excited to just see this interoperability and this capability of Microsoft to leverage some of that feature set. So, it'll be interesting to see how it kind of shakes and pans out. And you've seen COVID obviously accelerated what the adoption from a collaboration perspective meant. But you also saw Microsoft pause and go forward and pause with how they were going to really start to rely on some of their routing partners, which we'll probably get into a little bit of that and kind of what that means. But to me, it's great to see them really leaning on the rest of the UC world and not just putting up this wall saying, we're going to go to battle against you. So that's kind of what I'm excited to see about how that accelerates from an integration perspective with their other channel players that everybody's familiar with.
Right. Megan, you touched on something that I want to talk about further, and that is the user experience, the ease of use with these different platforms. I don't know anybody who is talking more with end users and evaluating suppliers than you. And so when you look at the breadth of the services that we're able to offer, talk to me about what those considerations look like when it comes to the ease of use and how Microsoft and Teams plays into that.
Yeah, so I think customers are saying, yeah, 'cause when they're using the Teams interface, I mean, it's something they've been used to using all year for the most part. When we start talking to them about a reliable voice service on top of that, I always ask them, so do you want something where it's a separate pop-up? You've got this extra soft phone, you're keeping them two separate things, but it's got all the features and functionality you could want and more. Are your employees, are they open to looking at something like that? Or do you think that that change in behavior is going to be so challenging that we shouldn't even go there? We need to look for something that has a phone icon that's embedded within that Teams environment, and everything just lives out of that. And I always ask that, because I think, coming from this industry and being in UCaaS for so long, my first thought was, if you want really robust functionality, you want a separate pop-up. You want this soft phone. You want this UCaaS environment and everything it can offer you. But now you're going to have to live into two different platforms and environments. That's the route that I would prefer they go, just because of the functionality. But the majority of them will say, no, we don't want to have to relearn a different platform. Why would we have two different user interfaces? It's too confusing for our customers. So they do want something where they can just click on, through the dial pad within Teams, just click on that phone icon, make the call behind the scenes, and their employees don't have to think about where is this call being routed to and from. I'm just making a call from Teams, or I'm using my mobile app to make the call as well, and it's reliable, and that's all I have to worry about. So those are the things I just have to take into consideration, because you can't automatically assume they want to live out of one platform. There are some that say, oh, we don't care. We're just using that for the collaboration piece, but if you got something better, we're open to looking at that. That's rare. So the majority of time, just be prepared. They're going to want to say, or at least what I'm hearing is they're going to say, I want something so easy. I don't want to have to relearn a new platform. I just want all this to happen in the background. And I want that front piece to be Teams. And really, you can't get any easier than that. So that's what I'm hearing. But just give them those options, because you can present in different options.
I want to briefly talk about the matrix that the three of us, in conjunction with our colleague Andrew Bowser, have put together. And when you evaluate, and we'll talk about this a little later, but when you evaluate the number of suppliers who are dipping into Microsoft Teams, it can be a really difficult landscape for end users to navigate. I think right now we have about 18 that we've identified as viable suppliers. However, they're not all created equal, right? And how they get to Microsoft Teams and ultimately route that back can be confusing at best. And I think what we have found initially was that there were some terms being thrown around within the conversations that didn't necessarily mean what we thought they meant, because of the influence of marketing and almost ambiguity with the terms. And so, Josh, if we could, let's first identify what direct routing is and how that's accomplished, and what the myth has been surrounding that term.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. And one thought too, when you take into consideration for direct routing, is one other question that you have to ask to get an understanding of what the customer's appetite is what is the expertise on their side, right? Because this is all administered, if you're trying to do it yourself, in the 365 Exchange Admin Center and the Teams Admin Center. And so you've got to also want to flush out, does the customer have the expertise in that on staff? Are they prepared to maintain and manage that? Because there is a lot of management components and things that you can do in there, but you've got to have a great level of familiarity around that. So flush that out, to Megan's earlier point of, do they have that on staff, right? Obviously, if it's a big no, then a third-party solution is likely something that they're going to want with one of the providers that we're going to talk about here today with the direct routing. So be sure to ask that question as well. So with regard to direct routing, true direct routing means I go two routes on this call, right? If I keep this call all on Microsoft, when I'm doing a Teams to Teams user call, that stays on the Microsoft platform. That goes all over public internet, and that's fine. It's when I need to make a call, either A, from inside of Teams out to a 10-digit number on the PSTN to a non-Teams user, or vice versa. I need to receive a call inbound from somebody who is a non-Teams user just calling into a number that is mine within the Teams interface. And so it's when those two things happen, you got to understand how the call path flows. So if I'm inside of Teams architecture, where it all lives and breathes inside of Azure, that call makes its way eventually off to some POP where either Microsoft is going to terminate that voice if you've gone through all the licensing and the packages and the calling plans to do it yourself and ported the numbers into Microsoft. That stays on Microsoft's network for voice and drops it out over the PSTN, or you bring in what's called direct routing. So there's a handoff that happens here. So obviously you need some sort of license structure, some e-license structure with Microsoft to have, that 365 and to have Teams to begin with. And then when that voice call goes to get terminated, one of the suppliers, one of the 18 that you mentioned that we're going to talk about, that voice path gets handed off. And that supplier is now really responsible for porting in those numbers, having the traffic of that numbers leave Microsoft, hit a peering point, jump onto an SBC that is authorized on the Microsoft list. And that might be, you look for the suppliers that have audio codes and Ribbon and Oracle, a Meta or Cisco at their core, because those are what Microsoft says you have to have those if we're going to do true direct routing and send that traffic right over to that third-party provider's network. So when that happens, then what you'll see, and this is what I think we'll get into a little bit, is each provider starts to subtly differentiate themselves of how maybe they offer better minutes globally, or maybe they offer a different way to do licensing. Maybe it's API-based, auto-populating of the users and provisioning and porting and things like that. So we'll look for little subtle differentiators there of domestic versus global and capabilities, but understand that direct routing is changing where that call path goes. Does it stay on Microsoft together, or do we engage somebody that does direct routing that we're going to get into, that call path is now theirs? And then you're predicating the success of that on a provider that has built a domestic or global voice network with POPs and gateways as close to the user as possible, but does also follow the rules of Microsoft, saying, hey, we checked the box. We have certified SBCs of that list that I mentioned earlier of the 5 or 7 that have it, and we're going to handle that voice traffic because that's our bread and butter, and that's what we do.
Yeah, that's good. The other term that I want to talk about is something that Megan brought up earlier, and that is native integration, right? And that would be having that icon on the Teams page that you can click to dial, and that it's natively integrated into the platform. And what we're finding is that, like Megan suggested, not all suppliers are built the same, right? And so, Megan, if you would, talk about maybe some of the differences that you've seen between the response to a third-party widget versus that native integration.
Yeah, I think where we're finding the integrations that are what I call more tightly embedded or natively integrated, I think some of the suppliers who are Microsoft Gold partners can do a better job at that. Some suppliers will use the what is it called, to Teams connector. Sometimes they charge for that. Sometimes it's hidden in the background. I think this is something you were alluding to earlier, right, Shane? Was like, how do they market it, right? And it gets very confusing until you really dig deeper and find out the details on how they architect it. But I think when it's natively embedded, I mean, I've seen a lot of demos actually. And it goes back to the ease of use. So one of those where if you click on that phone icon, I want to be able to just make a call, whether it's in my directory, maybe it's someone I've saved from the outside in my directory, and be able to call on that, as opposed to other demos who aren't what I consider not natively integrated, where you bring up that dial pad, you click on the phone icon, now you've got to like do a search or do something or type in, hey, call so-and-so. And it's like, that's not user friendly. Why do I have to type in call so-and-so? Why can't I just punch in the number or pull it up from my directory, whether they're internal or external? So I think that's my idea of having it natively integrated. Again, just that whole user interface where as an end user, I don't have to think about it. I don't care who's providing me that call path or the technology behind it. I just want it to work for my team's environment. So to me, that's more of a natively integrated or embedded type of solution where I don't have to worry about, is it going to pop up a separate icon, application or soft phone, because some suppliers will do that as well. Hey, we've got this phone icon in there, but once you click it, it pops up our icon, and it's like, that just gets confusing. I just want something very seamless, and I don't frankly have to think about. So that to me is what natively integrated means. And I don't know, Josh might have a more technical.
Yeah. No, I know I'm on the technical side, but I've found that this is as much as a sales question that has to be asked and related to user experience and expectations, right? I think we've all seen a customer get sold a bill of goods and whoever sold it to them up and disappears because expectations were not met, and that customer's so livid and there's nothing that they can do to undo that. except feel that burn and that pain, which they will remember forever. So I'm a big proponent of flushing out, from an engineering side, we love to ask a lot of questions, right? It's not because we're bored and we're nerds, but we like to make sure that we're going to get it right and build the right solution. I mean, we are nerds, but we try to cover that as best as we can, because you have to ask that question of, how prevalent is Teams from a collaboration tool perspective? And you are going to get a different answer every time. And what I think you have to do is, if you ask these questions early, it won't bite you. It won't come up and bite you later. Because if you go down the road in the beginning of saying feature functionality, what do you need? Taking calls, maybe some call center functionality. Okay, where are your users? What's the target price? Those are all great things that you have to do. But now introduce that next question of, hey, do you guys have Office 365? Oh, yeah, we do. What licenses do you have? Oh, we have E3s. Well, we're thinking about going to E5. Oh, why were you looking at going to E5? Well, we're looking at talking about Teams, starting to use that. And so you start to kind of go down that road of, it looks like this company might be going full all in collaboration with Teams. And if you go down the road and sell them a solution that, to Megan's point, is a clunky third party, maybe click to dial only integration, not, well, I expect when I pull up the Teams dial pad and go to make a call, it ties into AD, my users are authenticated, the corporate directory is there, and I can just type in the name of Megan or Shane or whoever that I get. It's that level of disappointment when they see that makes them realize we didn't get the right solution. So that's why I'm such a fan of flushing those things out, adding that extra chain of questions early on, because what I found is that when I ask that question to IT, they might say, yeah, we just use it for a little bit for collaboration. I mean, it's not a big deal. And I go ask that to the C levels and the people that are signing the contracts. It's, yeah, I really want, I want Teams to become more prevalent in the environment. I want that to be the only application that we use. We're not interested in asking our 800 users to add a new application to their repertoire. They've already got a couple that they use. So you've really got to bring those together. And we just find ourselves honestly getting people on the same page and asking and flushing out questions and requirements. And Teams just has introduced a new dynamic where it's critical that you do that early on.
That's good. I like that. So I want to talk about call to Teams. If I'm an end user, right, and we've got this session full of end users here today, why do I care? Why do I care if there is this third party that is helping assist in the routing of that call? And talk to me about the considerations when I choose a supplier that utilizes this as a service.
I think if you look at something like what Call to Teams does, Call to Teams has a really defined specialty, in my mind, especially around the setting up and the authentication and the creation and the management of the users, right? Kind of the administrative back end, where there are plenty of people doing direct routing, leveraging Call to Teams or doing it in some other way, shape, or form. But the autonomous or the autonomy that gives them of, okay, we're a UC provider. I'm going to pick on 8x8, for example. 8x8 has a great integration, and all you have to do, and others have this as well, is plug in the credentials for your 365 admin user that has rights to Teams. You plug that user in, then that goes in and it pulls in all the users that you want, provisions all those numbers, gets everything ready to do the porting, and then automatically takes in all the data that, where 8x8, for example, they have the SBCs, they have the audio codes SBCs out in Azure, for example, and it knows the IP addresses of those within the 8x8 network that it needs to hit. So that those credentials have to be put back into the 365 admin interface and plugged in accordingly, and everything's got to be dialed in there for there to function. That's an incredibly manual process that is easy to fat finger and get wrong, and then you got to chase down and figure it out. So I'm a big fan just automating anything that you can. And so I think folks that use Call to Teams in that fashion, whether it's more prevalent or whether it's more behind the scenes, adds a huge layer of removal of complexity to that provisioning process and then ongoing user and management of those users.
Yeah. And so part of the myth around direct routing when we first got into the conversation was that there was this contingent of UCaaS suppliers who was directly connected to approved SBCs within the Microsoft environment, which is not necessarily the case. And as we've identified those who are using it and those who are not, it's been interesting to see just exactly how they utilize it and what that means to you as an end user. And it's not a bad thing, is what we found out. And that term, although it is not necessary, direct routing is not necessarily the same because you're going or adding an additional hop into the network, it can actually be a real benefit, especially when you have that automation. Anecdotally though, Megan, we have seen, haven't we, where there are some end users who have had some real frustration at times with adding an additional hop into that network. There was a customer who I was talking to recently that in the early days and the early stages of this collaboration with Teams, what they found was that they had to reach out to Teams directly to have this set up. And the frustration was in, listen, I signed with you, Mr. UCaaS supplier. I don't want to have to go to Teams and then set that up myself or incur an additional charge. And what we're finding is that business model continues to shift with the different suppliers. And the good ones are doing it so that you never know that that's running in the background, and it's actually really advantageous that they do use it. One of the other considerations, and this is the importance of working with someone like Megan to really identify who's the best for your scenario, is if you have an app, for example, with your UC provider, and you've got that Teams environment open, you may find that because of there may be some lag in between the two. And if you open up a call or from Teams, it's not captured underneath in that app, or vice versa. And as well, if you send a call to voicemail on the Teams app, you may find that that voicemail is captured in Teams and is not captured in your app. Whereas if you were to reject that call and send it to voicemail in the app, it would be found in the app or in that UCaaS back office or in their cache versus in your Teams environment. And that can be a bit clunky at times and open to some some frustration. At the end of the day, I think what it comes down to though, and what we're going to hit on more and more, is that based on your requirements, what your goals are, we can procure the different suppliers that really fit that and match that. And like we talked about earlier, there are about 18 to 20 of these who we've identified who have capabilities, but they are all very, very different and are succeeding in different verticals. So if you, the medical professional today, were to ask us for a recommendation, we could give you a host of the different suppliers who we've worked with that have succeeded with Teams in that type of a vertical. I want to back up for just a minute because there is another consideration when you talk about just UCaaS in general, but it really is amplified within Teams, and that is Carey's Law. And so Josh, let's talk a little about the importance of that specific, very identified space for E911.
Yeah, so Carey's Law came about because of a really unfortunate situation where somebody had called 911, needed those emergency services right away, but because it was a multi-floor, multi-room building, couldn't get there, couldn't take care of the problem, couldn't get the the police and whoever needed to come in there right away. And so there was an unfortunate series of events that if technology would have been better, could the first responders have gotten where they needed to get to quicker? Could they have found that place? So the law was passed to really dictate and change how E911 is handled, right? It used to be, here's an address associated with this number. That's it. Now the laws around E911 are changing to, is it a floor? Is it a building? Is it a campus environment, right? Other levels of granularity that will be passed along as part of that E911 location data to the first responders. And so, I think that's huge and that's prevalent. And some of these great technology changes come about because of unfortunate situations like that hopefully can be improved upon to prevent other things like that from happening again. And Meg and I were just talking about this. I mean, we get brought into, all sorts of different scenarios, but I think Megan, you had one where something like that could certainly have assisted. I don't know if you want to talk maybe just for a minute about just the generalities of that.
Yeah. There's an opportunity right now where we're working with a customer where they're an ambulance dispatching company. So you can see, right, they've got different departments, they've got a group of dispatchers, and then it gets sent to ambulatory services and whatnot. So I think it's really important for them to utilize something like this, like an E911, to pinpoint exactly the location. so that they can dispatch immediately their first responders to wherever they need to go without second guessing. So yeah, we do come across that. I think we're starting to hear it more and more in the last year, that need. And I believe that the law is too now for UCaaS providers. I mean, they have to adhere to that. In the past, it used to just be, hey, we got to be E911 compliant. Great, we can do that based on an address. And now they really have to take it a step further. And so that's definitely something our customers need to seriously consider and ask those questions, so we can find that right solution for them.
Yeah, and let me throw one other thought in that too, Shane, is that look, we've kind of recognized that the customer is always in a different step of digital transformation. They may be fully ready to go all cloud and want to look at a UCaaS provider and go all in, right? With some of the UCaaS, some of the 15 to 20 that we're talking about, or they still may be in a premise environment, right? It may be a multi-location, big campus, a lot of CapEx resources sunk into that. So, with regard to Carrie's law, I would just say specifically that we understand that. We understand those requirements, and there's ways to accommodate that either way, right? To more intelligently enable a premise environment or go fully enable a UC environment. It just depends where everybody's at. So just to make sure everybody understands that.
And when you look at what you're alluding to is kind of this hybrid environment where there may be premise-based equipment, or if you've got just a handful of users or certain divisions on teams, there are options for you to make sure that you're still compliant and that and more than just compliant, that people are safe, right? And that this works. It's interesting, Megan and I, we started in the days when it was all based out of a CO. And so this was really easy. And so we had to go through the wild, wild west of these asterisk servers and just SIP in general and kind of figuring out 911. And it almost feels like with this Microsoft Teams conversation that we're kind of back to it. And I'm really glad that they have the organization. So we have figured this out. And as an end user, rest assured that we have solutions, and this is a really important consideration when looking at different suppliers.
Shane, do you remember back in the day too, when E911 first came out, we had to put stickers on the phones before they went out. Like, you had to have a sticker on your phone to say, hey, you know what? This is E911 compliant. And I think today it's just a given. I mean, it's table stakes. You have to be compliant.
So let's talk about Microsoft licensing. And this is a bit confusing, right? Especially for those of us who have come from the traditional world of telecom services. So now we're starting to introduce Microsoft, who's this behemoth that sells seemingly everything under the sun. Yet when you look at how it integrates with our technology, there are some certain licenses that you need to have, and you need to be aware that there are bolt-on charges to using a third-party UCaaS provider. So Josh, let's talk about E1, 3, 5, and the different considerations and that $8 bolt-on charge.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow it'll be E9 and 10.
Yeah,
figure out what those,
right?
man. I mean,
right.
Look, the reality is this stuff just changes every single day. I think part of, as an extension of the Matrix team, our value is that not only are we in front of this now, but we're ready for when tomorrow, when the big news drops, what does that really mean? And how do customers need to be ready and be prepared for that? And so Andrew Bowser's done a great job of helping us really break down what those cost components are. One, if I go and do it myself, I try to figure it all out with Microsoft, versus do I leverage one of these telephony partners that we're talking about? So, you have the Microsoft e-licensing structure that I think everybody's familiar with. And there are other different licenses besides the E3s and E5s and E1s or any of those beginning ones. But you once you get to that kind of E3 structure, you have some sort of access to some version of Teams. So then you have to decide, okay, I have Teams. I could Teams call you. I could Teams call Megan, and that it's going to go over my headset, over the public internet, and all as well. It's that when I want to take that next step of do that, PSTN enabled calling, 10-digit numbers in or 10-digit numbers out, how do I handle that? So there's 3 buckets. So bucket number 1 is the e-licensing structure. Whatever cost you pay, that's the first factor. So when you're adding in costs, calculate that. The second piece is the PBX license. So you've got to factor in that in. And I believe, Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, still about around the $12 range.
I think it's $8. Is it 8? I think it's an $8 phone system.
Okay, so eight for the PBX license. And then you've got to factor in the third piece. You've got to do the calling plan.
Yep.
So when you start to add all these things up, maybe it makes sense for you to move into an E5, right? And then you get a lot of that piece, but you still had to figure out what you want to do with that calling plan. So these costs start to add up. So to where maybe what you were in $10 or $15 a user is approaching this $30, $40, $50 a user, depending on all the feature functionality that you want. So you've got to remember that if you start to go down that road of, okay, I'm going to go E5, I'm going to get Microsoft's calling plan, I'm going to do it myself, you've got to remember that it's all on you. So you've got to handle the porting. You've got to do that with Microsoft, whether you have good experiences with doing things like that before from a support perspective or bad experiences. Just factor things like that in. And then you are the PBX maintainer, right? You know, I liken it to historically the premise telephony, you know, the Nortels, the NECs, right? You had that, that somebody that supported that environment. You had the maintenance contract. This is obviously this is cloud, but somebody has to maintain and support that, whether that's somebody on your team, whether you're paying a third party to come in and support that, build it, maintain it, whatever you want. It's got to be supported, designed, and architected, right? It's not as drag and drop, you know, get in there and experience it and understand it. So that's your licensing structure direct. So if you try to go the other route, right, the UC provider route, you stay with that e-licensing structure and stop there. And then you choose through a different version of, you know, this is where the UC providers really start to differentiate themselves. Can you leverage them for that calling plan and some of those extra capabilities, where now what you have is you have somebody that is predicated their entire business model on porting, on user experience, on customer support, on the design. It's a fully managed version of it to where you can keep your E3, you know, licensing structure that you have with Microsoft. And if anybody is supporting that existing Microsoft environment, that's fine. You just leverage and offload the telephony via a direct routing partner, and you add those incremental costs up on that side. So really the costs aren't that much different. In some aspects, you can save some money depending on providers where, you know, again, this is where they differentiate themselves from a cost perspective. Maybe we have some that give buckets of free minutes. Maybe we have some that unlimited calling into a certain amount of countries. And so there are layers of differentiation from the providers. If you understand that the costs can be similar, but for that, if there's any small increase, you get a massive amount of gain of somebody that is doing the porting, the support, the creation, the built out a global network of voice and is continuing to expand that. And that's where their investments are going, not into, you know, a lot of other services. And so you've got to weigh those things out and differentiate. Do I want to go this route, look at those incremental costs here? Or, and is there a higher TCO for my folks to manage and maintain that? Or do I go this route, use the third-party telephony providers and let my folks stay back doing the things that are their core responsibilities and not having to maintain the telephony portion?
I would say that the other component to this is you're still having to look at the other integrations that you're working with. Teams is not the only environment that really matters here, right? If you're a big Salesforce user and you want to have access to click to dial within that, you know, as somebody like an Xtiva would be really good, right? Vonage does a fantastic job with that as well. And so it's the entire package. And I would almost step back from the Teams conversation to say, at times, and we've maybe hinted around this, the Teams conversation is a really good lead into another platform. You may find that, you know what, with the licensing costs that Josh has outlined, a Ring Central may be a better option and just stick with their platform altogether. Or if you look at GoTo, who has the capabilities of doing all of the different chat and video feature as well, that might be a better option.
Well, and another thought to that too is that, you know, you mentioned this a minute ago, where a lot of the providers that we're talking about are born and raised UC and contact center providers, but some of these are providers that have a tried and true top-notch global network where, you know, specifically talking about somebody like a MiXer, where if I'm a customer that has global backbone, I've had trouble with that global backbone and all my kind of disparate carriers across the board. Somebody like MiXer has the ability to connect all those, you know, bring it all on a MiXer network, do, you know, guaranteed 100% in sequence packet delivery and this amazing SLA they can wrap around it. Also has the direct routing, it has the Teams integration. So we also, you know, we look at, you know, ask the network architecture questions. What does the network look like, right? And we look at all these other things as kind of just applications that you're layering on. If the foundation of the house is good, everything else that you build on after that is going to perform accordingly. So do you have the visibility that you need into the network for these things to be enabled to be successful? And so if you don't, then you have to look at other, back to your integration point, other things that some of these providers call out. For example, if you are global, if you are looking at software-defined networking, then you have to pay attention to what integrations our UC providers have with SD-WAN providers, right? RingCentral has a great integration with Cato and CloudGenix and others, so as to prioritize that global traffic and keep it as semi-private as possible, so it has the best route, leveraging somebody else's layer 2 or somebody else's backbone as that traffic traverses pop to pop across the global network. And so comparatively, those SD-WAN platforms have the ability to automatically recognize the UC as an application. And so there's pre-built templates that can kind of help make your life easier as the IT administrator as well. So lots of different moving parts you got to think about.
Well, I think we're coming to the end of the session here. I want to make sure that we give people at least a chance to digest some of this. But I would say that, look, the team at Matrix, they are experts in this. We work closely with them. Ryan and everyone there is really adept at not only utilizing us, but cross collaborating when it comes to the opportunities that exist. And yeah, we appreciate it. If there are any final thoughts that you have, Megan, let us know. What would you say as a piece of advice to an end user for the session?
Yeah, I think Josh mentioned, right, this thing is changing overnight. Like, it just keeps changing. We're trying to stay on top of it. So we know it can get really confusing. So I would say for customers, just don't be intimidated by that. We know it's confusing. Along with the Matrix team, we'll help you through this and figure out what's important, what are requirements, what's important to you, Mr. Customer, and we'll make sure that we check all those boxes and we can help do a lot of the legwork to get you there, because it's ever changing, and I think we do a pretty good job of staying on top of it. But we find ourselves too, sometimes we're like, what, is this right? Or did this change, or what's going on? And so we're here to do all that, the legwork for our customers to help them get through that process.
Well, you're an absolute rock star. We appreciate how much you dive into these conversations and really manage the ship.
Yeah.
Josh, any final parting thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would just say, if you're going down this journey to look at, visiting telephony, figuring out teams, what's the right fit, what's not the right fit, start to just kind of think about, what are your basic requirements of what these are our must-haves. Also be thinking about what are your integration requirements. Those are the two obviously driving criteria. But then think about what's on your wish list, right? The things that, if we could, in addition to meeting the must-haves, if we could do these 1, 2, 3 things, that would absolutely change the game for us and help our business become more efficient, or help our products get out to market, or help us be more agile. Be thinking of those 3 things, because I think those are all 3 equal things to have as we kind of draw out any conversations.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And on behalf of Telarus and Matrix, we really appreciate that you've joined us today. We know it's been just a little awkward. We had to pre-record this because of schedules and, of course, the pandemic that we're in, but we've really appreciated your patience. And we look forward to chatting with you more. I think you have about 15 minutes until your next session, and that'll start at noon. So if you want to return to the exhibit hall, you can check out the other suppliers, the other categories that we have. And again, thank you for your participation. And if there are any questions, please reach out to Matrix, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. See ya.